the walled gardens stand to gain the most?
There are vendors in each individual category that are maybe being a little bit more loosey-goosey in their interpretations of some very clearly stated privacy-safe design considerations and regulatory considerations. Don't think I'm being too apocalyptic when I say that this risks fracturing the common retail market that we have in the US. Someone's ability to respond cogently to these changes on the legislative front is directly related to their size and the size of their legal department. So whether that naturally then benefits some of the larger companies, I think yes. The reality of it is that everybody's going to have to find some type of solution for this. And maybe for smaller advertisers, that means just picking the platform that they're going to consolidate most of their advertising on and just calling it a day.
It'll definitely be a challenge for the ones that don't think that they have the resources to be able to keep up. That's for sure. I don't care whether you're a little bagel shop on Main Street. There is an opportunity for you to collect loyalty data for individual customers. The little loyalty punch cards that we had back in the day, being able to create a digital version of that is not difficult to do anymore.
This is resource intensive. I always encourage all of us to build your first party universe. I don't think there is anything more fundamental than brands having relationships with their end consumers. This is something that goes for every single brand. This is not a simple, let me just acquire data play. If you're willing to share your information with me, it's my responsibility to manage an ongoing relationship with you. So I have to start thinking about this not just as a data acquisition, but more as a consumer lifetime value type of place. Just because every single campaign you can acquire data, the question is what you do the day after you acquire that data. How are you managing and maintaining that relationship?
You're a small publisher, you're not necessarily behind, but you should definitely start now. You should be auditing your solutions for cookie dependency. You should be educating yourself on what options exist and what might exist in the near future. No matter what size you are, you should recognize how valuable your first-party data is. You should be focused on maximizing that asset and protecting it. I think those who have been over-reliant on commodifying traffic are probably going to have a harder time.
No matter what your niche is, just being able to understand who your readership, who your audience is, and being able to clearly convey that to media buyers is oftentimes enough to have a spot on a media plan. While bigger players are somewhat burdened with defending an established business and having to somehow drive innovation while trying to replicate technologies that might be going away. Smaller players might have the luxury of leaning heavily into innovative and alternative technologies for doing targeting that in some way will bring them up to par, if not leapfrog some existing solutions.
If you think about small regional groups of newspapers, the newspapers have the type of data that we're talking about, at least for the folks that are still receiving the physical paper in the mail. They have names, email addresses, physical mailing addresses. If they've squandered that opportunity to date, then they're going to struggle. But you would hope that even though it's a decreasing amount of consumers in that pool, it is still extremely valuable. And if I was one of those owners, one of those publishers, I would make sure that I am heads down focused on that. Same thing if I was a regional local television provider and producer. Every single piece of my programming would be attempting in some way, shape, or form to get those viewers to actually interact with us through my app or through my website in order to start collecting that first party relationship with those individual viewers.
So the Privacy Sandbox is a critical investment that the Chrome and Android team are investing in to ensure that we can deliver key advertising use cases while raising the bar for consumer privacy. And to be clear, our initiative is for the entire ecosystem. We're developing it out in the open with the W3C and with publishers, advertisers, and industry trade bodies along the way. And ideally, we'd love to see every browser adopt this technology, because what we found is when you don't provide solutions that deliver advertising use cases, but eliminate the technology that businesses are already using, it leads to a worse privacy experience and even more opaque technologies being developed.
the walled gardens stand to gain the most. And that's what concerns me the most, because they'll continue to have a disproportionate amount of power. If you aren't a walled garden, which most companies aren't, you will need to participate in marketplaces or band together, because that's how brands can find scale against a variety of different solutions. Otherwise, it will just be too fragmented.
Yeah. So when it comes to the walled gardens as they exist today, those walls getting higher, I think that's what's going to happen. The investment already organically flows into the walled gardens. Once you've actually now flipped over to this new model, it becomes a lot harder to walk away. Certainly mid-campaign or certainly mid-year for a lot of these big companies. Making the switch in and of itself takes years, in many cases, to actually do it end to end, to then all of a sudden 6 months later realize that this isn't working or isn't as great as I wanted it to be. I want to go over here and test these guys instead. Well, that's going to be a lot harder now because of how far we've gotten down this path.
The shift away from third-party based targeting essentially makes tracking users from one entity, from one website to another harder. But if the whole user journey, let's say from discovery to purchase of a given product, happens within one ecosystem, then the problem no longer exists. And so that's why you have this concentration of user journeys within platforms. And that's why you have something like the emergence of shoppable formats, for example, because it would be harder to track conversions once users leave the environment in which they are targeted with. On the other hand, there will be alternative solutions that will make audience-based targeting less of the primary and only way to target users. We talked about contextual targeting, we talked about semantic understanding of the context, and I sincerely believe that contextual targeting that is not based on audience data and identifiable information is going to be on par, if not superior, with audience-based targeting. It will give us more options.
Thinking about this from the framework of what exists right now, yes, there's evidence that there will be some gravitation toward walled gardens or existing platforms. That's certainly true. But I do think that players and solutions will evolve over the course of the year.
At Google, we're not interested in replacing third-party cookies with new identifiers, which come with their own challenges from a privacy perspective. But what we've seen is that when advertisers and publishers combine their first-party data in a pooled way, it more or less creates the exact same challenge that consumers have with privacy to begin with, where their behavior and browsing activity across multiple sites is being tracked and in ways that they don't understand and don't have great control over. So we think that creating new technology that just replicates the same exact use case that third-party cookies had is the wrong decision. As other browsers have phased out cookies over the past few years, we've seen a rise in device fingerprinting. Now, device fingerprinting is a technology that opaquely gathers unique characteristics about your device, about the browser that you're using, let's say the fonts that you have installed, or the version of the software that you're using, your geolocation, your IP address, and more. And they combine all of those factors to create a very unique and persistent profile. And this profile can be used for ads targeting and measurement. However, it's not visible to users and it's not controllable by users.
A lot of the existing alternatives right now, like universal IDs or hashed emails, are flawed and likely subject to some of the same privacy challenges as cookies themselves.
There are vendors in each individual category that are maybe being a little bit more loosey-goosey in their interpretations of some very clearly stated privacy-safe design considerations and regulatory considerations. It's very important to scrutinize new partners that you're wanting to work with. And so, for example, for a space that's as buzzy as clean rooms or even CDPs are, you really have to do your homework to understand what are the capabilities of a particular vendor versus what are the capabilities that they're claiming they have. And again, this goes for every category in play, but particularly identity, particularly any portion of the tech stack that touches user level data, campaign performance data, etc. For example, just a few weeks ago, we were helping somebody evaluate identity vendors, and we came back with the feedback that one of the identity vendors they were looking at was doing very heavy fingerprinting. And
there are solutions that say that they completely anonymize data. So there's pseudonymized and then there's anonymized. The idea being that pseudonymized, if there are enough signals to see, then someone could reverse engineer and potentially still identify an individual. If you're talking about a mobile device, there are dozens of signals potentially, then that starts to look like the fingerprinting.
I don't believe from what I've seen that the underlying technologies that we're now using, the alternate solutions to connect data together, pose any material risk. What I do think is a more interesting area is how we as society are going to continue to evolve what we mean by consumer privacy. I think we need to be ready to make further privacy enhancing changes as a result of changes in what society believes to be appropriate. For example, while the industry believes the type of deterministic matching that some ad tech players are currently using to create a publisher network from the first-party data of many individual publisher networks is compliant, I think society could quite easily change its view on that and what they truly believe consent allows us to do.
Nobody's prepared for it. One of the other realities, I think, too, that just in the tech space that we sort of have a tendency to ignore is the financial cadence at which not only the marketplace moves, but the advertisers themselves move. You can't all of a sudden switch a model in a way that a brand is going to go to market when it comes to its digital marketing 6 months into the year and fundamentally change it without there being a ton of chaos created just in the act of changing it. So the most successful releases of any type of technology is to align with the natural cadence of the business in general. Align the change to when companies have a fiscal year change, but just sort of arbitrarily having this cutover date later on this year. I don't expect a ton of brands to be doing anything other than continuing little incremental tests throughout the rest of calendar 2024. I think it'll be 25 at the earliest that you see brands actually fully make the switch. Faced with the prospect of a dip in revenue that is unpredictable at this moment, that's why I think they would be unlikely to be that draconian about how they go about it. There'll be more of a phased approach, perhaps by media channel or ad format or